Hello there. Atheist Jr. here, your friend and humble narrator. And after battling with my OBS a little bit, I finally got things up and running. My phone is about to turn on if you hear it make noise. So, but I put up a poll on my Patreon, seeing if you guys wanted to see me do a video about either the debate Mark Drysdale did or see me react to some Prager U videos, and Prager U won. So this is on you guys. But let's get into it.
Can you believe in God and science at the same time? So-called new atheists like Richard
Yes.
Dawkins and scientific materialists like Neil deGrasse Tyson certainly don't think so. To them, religion gets in the way of science. In their view, more science leads to less God. This is not a new position. It was first expressed over 100 years ago by English.
So the term "new atheist" it was coined by the journalist Gary Wolfe in 2006 to describe the position promoted by some atheists of the 21st century. And new atheism advocates the view that superstition, religion, and irrationalism should not simply be tolerated. Instead, they should be countered, criticized, and challenged by rational argument, especially when they exert undue influence, such as in government, education, and politics. And while I would definitely agree with that, I don't really like the sentiment or the title "new atheists." Just say atheists. You don't need that extra word in there. Stupid.
Physician John Draper in a book titled History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. Draper, who was deeply influenced by Darwin's then new theory of evolution, regarded organized religion as a direct and existential threat to the advancement of science. As he put it, religion and science are absolutely incompatible. They cannot exist together. Mankind must make its choice. It cannot have both. So are science and religion inevitably in conflict? Have they always been? Well, not exactly. In fact, the giants who established modern science, astronomer Johannes Kepler, chemist Robert Boyle, physicist Sir Isaac Newton, and others, were deeply religious men. They didn't see any conflict between science and religion. On the contrary, they thought that by doing science, they were discovering God's design and revealing it to mankind.
Well, Isaac Newton also believed in alchemy, and I believe at that time they thought that the four humors was the best way to go about doing medicine and scientific health research. So not everything they believed was true. And I think that this is something that a lot of religious people or creationists say is that, oh, look at all of these scientists back in like the 18th century that were Christian. Well, of course, the most educated and learned men would have also been part of the dominant religion back then. The people who would have been literate and intelligent and would have had the wealth to attend universities back then would have been people in Europe who were aristocrats, and most of those people were Christian. So I think this is more of an incidental fact than the reason that these scientific discoveries were made was because they had a Christian faith.
Indeed, it's no exaggeration to say that the Judeo-Christian religious tradition led directly to modern science.
No, no, I just flat out disagree with that.
To back up this claim, Cambridge University historian of science, Joseph Needham, posed a famous why there, why then question. Why there in Europe? Why then in the 16th and 17th centuries? Why didn't modern science start somewhere else before then? After all, the Egyptians erected pyramids. The Chinese invented the compass, block printing, and gunpowder. Romans built marvelous roads and aqueducts. The Greeks had great philosophers. Yet none of these cultures developed the systematic methods for investigating nature that arose in Western Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. This realization led Needham and other historians of science, such as Ian Barber and Herbert Butterfield, to look for some other X factor to explain why the scientific revolution occurred where and when it did.
Okay, so I think you're forgetting something. Like many other scientific advances, the scientific method originated in the Muslim world. So about 1,000 years ago, the Iraqi mathematician Ibn al-Haytham was already using this. So they were the ones who invented the numerical system that we still use today. And in the Western world, the modern scientific method was basically developed back in the 1930s, but the original method was first welcomed by astronomers such as Galileo and Kepler, and after the 17th century, its use became widespread, like he said. But the term science comes from the Latin word scientia, which means knowledge, and Aristotle equated science with reliability because it could be rationally and logically explained. But I think that Western reasoning was based on people's faith, not in religion, but in truth and logical deduction. So I think that, again, you're applying the reason that the scientific method was invented was because these people were Christians. But I just see that as being incidental. And a big part of that was people who were not Christian. Their faith was Islam. But, you don't mention that part.
Here's the conclusion they reached. Only the Judeo-Christian West had the necessary intellectual presuppositions to enable the rise of science. So what were those presuppositions? We can identify three. All find their origin in the Judeo-Christian idea of a creator God who fashioned an ordered universe. First, the founders of modern science assumed the intelligibility of nature, that nature had been designed by the mind of a rational God, the same God who made the rational minds of human beings. Thus, these men assumed that if they used their minds to carefully study nature, they could understand the order and design that God had placed in the world. Second, they assumed an underlying order in nature. This was best expressed by the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who argued there can be no living science unless there is a widespread instinctive conviction in the order of nature, a conviction he attributed to belief in the rationality of God. This idea led to the unprecedented use of mathematics to describe the orderly processes at work in the world.
So we're just going to attribute mathematics to Christian people and just not even mention Islam? Okay.
And it inspired the invention of better instruments, such as telescopes and microscopes, to
Citation needed, bro.
see that order. And third, these founders of modern science presupposed the contingency of nature. This simply means that God had many choices about how to make an orderly world.
You know that? How do you know that? How do you know that?
Just as there are many ways to design a clock, there were many ways that God could have designed the universe. To discover how he did,
It is the same God, but of course, these type of creationists would never admit that. But the individual people were not Christians. They were Muslims. So that's my point with that.
scientists could not merely deduce the order of nature by assuming what seemed most logical to them, that is, merely using reason alone to draw conclusions, as the Greek philosophers had tried to do. For example, the Greeks thought that since the most perfect form of motion was a circle, they assumed that the planets must have circular orbits, something that Kepler later refuted by careful observation. Indeed, because of
Was there a reason that the moon looked flat?
their theological convictions, the new scientists realized that they would have to observe, test, and measure in order to understand God's design.
That seems like you're tacking on your religion to the scientific method.
To these men, nature was like a book, a form of divine communication, intelligible to human investigation. For this reason, they also developed the concept of the laws of nature, implying God's governance over the natural order. Science was a way to decipher that order. The idea that science and religion are in conflict is a popular belief today.
No, it's fundamental to science itself. Science is the study of naturalistic phenomena. You can't tack on supernatural concepts like God creation and miracles because those are outside the realm of what we see in our natural world. So, by definition, science can't study those things. It's a limit of science.
But the history of science shows otherwise. All of us, laymen and scientists alike, owe a great debt to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Without that tradition, we'd be living in a much more primitive world, morally and scientifically.
Well, there are areas in Africa that are dominated by Christian faith, and they still have a ton of war crimes and poverty and very poor infrastructure. So I don't know why Christianity hasn't swooped in and fixed all of that. Okay, so we'll see if the super chats work today. We have a super chat from Dave Dallafure. I guess not. It says for $5. It says, how much is a degree at Prager U? Another PU like Patriot U. I don't know. I think they're technically free, but you can sign up and pay them if you want, even though they get funded by the Koch brothers.
I'm Stephen Meyer, historian and philosopher of science at the Discovery Institute for Prager University. Was the universe always here, or did it have a beginning? If so, how did it start? From ancient times, philosophers and theologians have debated these questions. But it wasn't until the 20th century that a series of stunning scientific discoveries finally enabled us to get some answers. The story begins in 1912, when American astronomer Vesto Slipher observed that light coming from distant
That sounds like a Pokemon.
nebulae, clouds of dust and gas in outer space, appeared redder than expected. Why was this important? Here's where your high school science pays off. Remember learning about the Doppler effect? The frequency of sound, light, or other waves changes as the source and observer move toward or away from each other. To demonstrate this, your science...
Okay, we have a super sticker from No Man 2 for 40 yen? I don't know. But thank you, No Man. Thank you for the super sticker.
His teacher likely played a recording of a train whistle. The pitch of the whistle
Oh, 40 rupees. Thank you. Thank you so much.
lowers, that is, the sound wave stretches out as the train recedes into the distance. Well, the same thing happens with light. If a distant star or galaxy is moving away from us, the light coming from that object will also stretch out. Since in the spectrum of visible light, red light corresponds to the longest wavelengths, physicists say light that has been stretched out has been red-shifted. This evidence of redshift suggested the nebulae were moving away from us. In 1924, astronomer Edwin
I have no problem with anything that he said there.
Hubble, working with a new 100-inch telescope on
Nice.
Mount Wilson in California, showed that Slipher's nebulae were not just clouds of gas around distant stars, but actually distant galaxies beyond our Milky Way. Soon after that, the Belgian physicist Georges Lemaitre correlated Slipher's redshift data with Hubble's measurements of the distances to other galaxies. Lemaitre showed that galaxies that were farther away were receding faster than those close at hand. That suggested a spherical expansion of the universe in all directions of space, as if the universe were expanding like a balloon from a singular explosive beginning, from a Big Bang. Oddly, Albert Einstein had earlier tumbled to this idea, but then dismissed it. Einstein's new theory of gravity, known as general relativity, envisioned massive bodies altering the curvature of space, like
altering the curvature of space-time, the fabric of space-time. He was saying that extremely massive objects would bend the fabric of space-time, and that this is what caused gravitational objects like planets to be attracted to each other.
a bowling ball making a depression on a trampoline. Einstein's concept of gravity implied that space would contract in on itself unless gravity was continually counteracted by the expansion of space. For this reason, Einstein posited a constantly acting repulsive force, known as the cosmological constant, to counter gravitational attraction. But that implied a dynamic and expanding universe, and also a beginning. To avoid this conclusion, Einstein altered his own equations by arbitrarily assigning a precise value to the force of expansion to ensure that the strength of gravity and the repulsive force exactly balanced. Thus, he depicted the universe in a perfectly poised static state, neither expanding from a beginning nor contracting toward a collapse. But then with Slipher and Hubble's discoveries, the heavens talked back. In 1927, Lemaitre informed Einstein, in a taxicab no less, about the redshift evidence for an expanding universe. In 1931, Einstein visited Hubble at the Mount Wilson Observatory and viewed the evidence for himself. Later, he announced, to his great credit, that denying the evidence for the universe having had a beginning was the greatest blunder of my scientific career.
Okay, stop. So that's not what he said. Okay, you're extrapolating what Einstein said and adding on to it. Okay, so prevailing scientific opinion at the time held that the universe was static. So Einstein introduced a mathematical fudge factor into his equations, known as the cosmological constant, or a lambda. It implied that the existence of a repulsive force pervading space that counteracts the gravitational attraction holding matter together existed. So here's an actual quote from Einstein. It says, "If Hubble's expansion had been discovered at the time of the creation of the general theory of relativity, the cosmologic member would have never been introduced. It seems now so much less justified to introduce such a member into the field equations, since its introduction loses its sole original justification." So Einstein originally introduced the constant in 1917 to counterbalance the effect of gravity and achieve a static universe, like he said, a notion which was the accepted view at the time, but he abandoned it in 1931 after Hubble's discoveries. So I don't think it's exactly accurate to say that him denying the evidence of the universe having a beginning was his greatest blunder. He said that adding in his fudge factor was the greatest blunder. But that's you adding on to what he said and extrapolating something that he didn't say to make your point sound better. So he said that adding the term to his equations was his blunder. And we don't even know for sure if the universe truly has a beginning. We just call the earliest point in the Big Bang t=0 because that's where our mathematics break down and you start getting infinite values. And that's why the term singularity is used. The singularity, it's not a literal thing that cosmologists know was there. It's just a mathematical concept. But this model makes outstanding predictions, so for now it's what the scientists are going with. But let's not misrepresent what Einstein said, okay?
Throughout the 20th century, physicists proposed other theories that denied a cosmic beginning. One by one, new evidence showed each to be inadequate. By the 1990s, the Big Bang theory had prevailed as the best explanation for multiple lines of astronomical evidence. So why was such evidence upsetting to Einstein and to many other scientists? Princeton University physicist Robert Dicke explained, "An infinitely
Robert Dicke?
old universe would relieve us of the necessity of explaining the origin of matter at any finite time in the past." And so it would. But if the physical universe of matter, energy, space, and time
Space-time. Not space and time.
had a beginning, it becomes extremely difficult to conceive of a physical or material cause for the origin of the universe. After all, it was matter and energy that first came into existence at the Big Bang.
No, wrong. It was only energy. There was no matter. Besides, they're equal anyway.
Before that, no matter or energy would have yet existed to do the causing.
Can you prove that? Were you there? Were you there?
Consequently, whatever did cause the universe to exist would need to be immaterial and exist beyond space and time.
Oh, must have been God then. Must have been God. Checkmate atheists.
To many scientists and philosophers, all this sounds an awful lot like the first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I'm Stephen Meyer of the Discovery Institute.
Wow, that's it. Okay. Which Bible? Which translation? Which language is it in?
An author of Return of the God Hypothesis for Prager University. Does a design require a designer?
Well, kinda. Not if you have incidental design, because you can have a chaotic system, and if you apply a simple set of rules to that chaotic system, you will produce order just about every single time without any input from an intelligent designer.
Keep that question in mind as we look at some new scientific discoveries about the origin of life in the universe. Since Charles Darwin published his theory of evolution in 1859, many scientists have denied that design requires a designer.
What? No. What? No. No.
Darwinists have long claimed that the mechanism
Don't use the word Darwinist. Nobody cares about Charles Darwin anymore. Okay, he obviously contributed a lot, but evolution is not obsessed with just Darwin. There's a lot more to it. So this is a thing that doesn't exist. Nobody calls himself a Darwinist.
of natural selection could generate the appearance or illusion of design without being directed or guided in any way.
Evolution by natural selection, you can't say that it's not directed in any way because natural selection is going to favor animals with thicker fur in cold environments or animals that can survive hotter climates. In hot climates, you have animals like mice that have big, thin ears with blood vessels in them that allow them to radiate heat off of them. And people with lighter skin tend to not be able to survive as well in hotter climates because of the sun. So that's an incidental direction that natural selection selects for.
Recently, however, even staunch Darwinists have acknowledged that living.
Okay, I have another $5 super chat from Dave Dalafiore, and for some reason it just doesn't pop up on the screen. It says, "Does the Discovery Institute work on Discovery Plus on my Apple TV?" I think that's a different Discovery. That's the Discovery Channel.
Things may have certain features that display evidence of actual, intelligent design, though their ideas about who designed life on Earth are, well, a bit out there. Some prominent scientists have proposed that space aliens designed and then transported life to Earth. Evolutionary biologist and noted atheist Richard Dawkins has even floated this idea, suggesting that extraterrestrials may be responsible for a possible signature of intelligence in life.
Okay, so panspermia is what he's talking about. Panspermia is the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe, distributed by space dust, meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and planetoids, as well as possibly by spacecraft carrying unintended contamination by microorganisms. Panspermia is a fringe theory with little support among mainstream scientists, and critics argue that it does not answer the question of the origin of life, but merely places it on another celestial body. It has also been criticized because it can't be tested experimentally. So I found a tweet from Richard Dawkins about this topic, and it says, "Apparently, I'm accused of advocating panspermia. Confused with Fred Hoyle? How did that start?"
Indeed, no less a scientific genius than Francis Crick, who helped discover DNA, also proposed the idea that ETs seeded life on Earth to set the evolutionary process in motion. If true, we have an intergalactic Johnny Appleseed to thank for starting the chain reaction that has taken us from inanimate matter.
Oh, don't you dare bust out the Rock. Come on. He's not really doing the Rock thing, is he?
To Shakespeare. So why have these scientists considered this seemingly far-fetched possibility? Because they have encountered a big mystery they can't explain. It turns out that even the simplest living cells aren't simple at all, and that discovery has made it extremely difficult to explain the origin of life. Recall from biology class that Crick and his partner James Watson discovered the structure of the DNA molecule. When they did, they also realized that the chemical subunits in DNA function like letters in a written language or digital symbols in a computer code.
Pause, hold up. Where did they say that? Okay, sure, they said it was like letters, but where did they say that it was like a computer code? Because if you look in the sources for this video, they have the sources for the first 5 minutes, and that's it. So I don't know. I couldn't find a source on this, but I found a quote from an article that was titled "Why It's Dangerous to Call DNA a Computer Code," and it says, "Programmers write software through trial and error. Because computer systems are so complex and there is no real theory of software, programmers repeatedly test the code they write until it works properly. This makes sense because both the cost of getting it wrong and the ease of trying again is so low. But all finished software is still riddled with bugs, which is why it requires continual updates and patches." So the trouble with what is standard practice in software is that it won't work in bioengineering. Biological code, like computer code, will inevitably have programming bugs in it for the simple reason that we've never found a way of writing bug-free code of any complexity. And there is so far no way to patch biological systems once released into the wild, although researchers are trying to develop one. Nor are there ways to patch the humans or animals or crops susceptible to such agents. Biocontaminant helps, but no containment system provides zero risk. In other words, choosing to play God may not be a smart career move for us mere humans. And I agree. And one of the things I've said about comparing computer code to DNA is that DNA is redundant. So you can have a change in the nucleotide sequence where you can change sometimes multiple letters and have no effect on the organism. But in computer code, a lot of times if you have a single bracket, period, or character out of place, it could screw up the entire script that you're writing. Like if you don't close a caret, or if you don't close a bracket, stuff like that. So that's, to me, a pretty simple reason why they really shouldn't be compared.
As Bill Gates has explained, DNA is like a
Bill Gates is an atheist.
computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created, which kind of suggests a master programmer. Could such an intelligent designer have been an alien, as Crick and Dawkins have suggested?
When did they suggest that? And you're saying one of the guys who discovered DNA suggested that aliens created life on Earth? What?
Perhaps, but there are problems with this explanation. Big ones. First, the spaceship theory does not actually solve the problem of the ultimate origin of life. In fact, it dodges the whole question of where this super smart alien came from. How did he evolve? How did the first
What?
life and the genetic information necessary to produce it first arise on his planet?
Okay, now we're talking about a spaceship, and now we're talking about an individual alien who's a boy? How do you know that it's a he? Did you check?
But there is something else the ET hypothesis does not explain. Modern physics has revealed evidence of design in the very fabric of the universe.
Where?
Physicists have discovered that the fundamental physical parameters of our universe have been finely tuned, against all odds, to make our universe capable of hosting life.
Okay, if the universe is fine-tuned for life, why is life such an extremely rare part of it? And how fine is fine anyway?
Even the slightest alterations in the values of key factors, such as the strength of gravity or electromagnetism, or the masses of elementary particles, would render life impossible.
Okay, you're wrong when you say that, our fine-tuning began at the very beginning of the universe, and the parameters for the constants of our universe that we see today are not the same back at the beginning of the Big Bang. So there are four fundamental forces at work in our universe: the strong force, the weak force, the electromagnetic force, and the gravitational force. And astrophysicists theorize that during the Planck epoch, which was an extremely short time after the Big Bang started, these four forces were united into one force. So, I mean, if they were all combined and they've changed, that doesn't really seem like it's fine-tuned. Also, if the universe is fine-tuned, why is the universe expanding? If it's fine-tuned, it shouldn't be changing, right? I don't know.
We live in a kind of Goldilocks universe where the fundamental forces of physics have just the right balance and the properties of matter have just the right characteristics and configurations to make life possible. To illustrate this idea, the late
What kind of life? Are you talking about life like you and me? Or are you talking about extremely simple single cellular life? Because, if you just say life, you got to be a little bit more specific than that.
Cambridge physicist Sir John Polkinghorne imagined a universe-creating machine with numerous dials, each representing some critical parameter. The various dials each have an almost infinite range of settings, yet all are set just right. Not surprisingly, Polkinghorne and many physicists have concluded that the improbable cosmic fine-tuning of our actual universe points to a cosmic fine-tuner.
Of course it does. It seems like all of your conclusions or all of your evidence seems to go back to this same conclusion that, oh, my God did it. But even if you just look at the Earth, the habitable zone of our Earth is 0.9 to 1.2 astronomical units away from the sun. So we have a pretty large amount of wiggle room that the Earth could be closer to the sun or farther away without getting too cold or too hot. So if there really was fine-tuned parameters, then we wouldn't have such a large gap that we could move the orbit and still not burn up or freeze to death,
As legendary Cambridge astrophysicist Sir Fred Hoyle argued, a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics to make life possible.
Fred Hoyle was crazy.
Could this super-intellect have been an alien? Not a chance. Cosmic fine-tuning has been present from the beginning of the universe, and thus cannot be explained by any agent that arises after the beginning.
How do you know that? How do you know?
Instead, fine-tuning is better explained by an intelligent agent outside the universe who could design its structure as a whole.
If something does not exist within the universe, then it doesn't exist in our universe. Therefore, it doesn't exist. So you can't affect something if you're not in the universe. That's special pleading.
To avoid this conclusion, some physicists have postulated another speculative hypothesis: the existence of a vast number of other parallel universes. This so-called multiverse idea portrays our universe as the outcome of a cosmic lottery in which some universe-generating mechanism spits out billions and billions of universes, so many that our universe, with its improbable combination of life-conducive factors, would eventually have to arise. Yet advocates of the multiverse overlook an obvious problem. All such proposals, whether based on something called inflationary cosmology or string theory, postulate universe-generating mechanisms that themselves require prior, unexplained fine-tuning.
Do you really think that anybody who writes papers about multiverse theory hasn't thought of that? Do you really think that that's totally unaccounted for? And string theory is talking about additional compactified dimensions. I don't think it's talking about a multiple universe theory. And there's the many worlds hypothesis, which is more to do with quantum mechanics and the collapse of the wave function. That seems like a separate thing, but the thing is that people who publish papers that use the multiverse theory as they assume the multiverse, they are able to make predictions that are extremely accurate. So they recognize that it's not intuitive to how, our daily lives are. This is how science is done. You assume a multiverse theory in order to do research on it, because we can't study the multiverse. And I think it's ridiculous to say that people who have spent their whole lives getting educated on this would just not account for what you're saying. How do you know that? Were you there?
Thus taking us back to the need for an ultimate or transcendent fine-tuner or designing intelligence. Many of us call this intelligence God. I'm Stephen Meyer, Discovery Institute Senior Fellow and author of Return of the God Hypothesis for Prager University.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
Chances are, if you've heard anything about intelligent design, you've heard that it's a faith-based, not a science-based idea.
It is.
Or maybe you've even heard it's religion masquerading as science. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. It was proved in court during the Kitzmiller versus Dover case. And that was actually a case or a trial where you were supposed to be a witness on the side of intelligent design, Stephen Meyer, but you didn't show up. Why is that? So it's not just Darwinists or people who accept the facts about biology who know that ID isn't science. Okay, it was proven in court. And I'm going to read the judge's conclusion here. It says, the proper application of both the endorsement and Lemon test to the facts of this case makes it abundantly clear that the board's ID policy violates the Establishment Clause. In making this determination, we have addressed the seminal question of whether ID is science. We have concluded that it is not, and moreover, that ID cannot uncouple itself from its creationist and thus religious antecedents. Both defendants and many of the leading proponents of ID make a bedrock assumption which is utterly false. Their presupposition is that evolutionary theory is antithetical to a belief in the existence of a supreme being and to religion in general. Repeatedly in this trial, plaintiffs' scientific experts testified that the theory of evolution represents good science, is overwhelmingly accepted by the scientific community, and that in no way conflicts with nor does it deny the existence of a divine creator. To be sure, Darwin's theory of evolution is imperfect. However, the fact that a scientific theory cannot yet render an explanation on every point should not be used as a pretext to thrust an untestable alternative hypothesis grounded in religion into the science classroom or to misrepresent well-established scientific propositions. And the funny thing about the Dover trial is that the ID side thought that they had it in the bag because the judge was appointed by George W. Bush, and the guy still said that ID isn't science.
Well, why don't you decide? According to evolutionary biologists, such as Richard Dawkins of Oxford University, living systems give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. But that appearance is merely an illusion. Why? Well, according to Dawkins and his followers, undirected processes such as natural selection and random mutations can produce the intricate design-like structures in living systems.
Why not? Of course they can.
In their view, natural selection can mimic the powers of a designing intelligence without being guided or directed in any way. In contrast, the proponents of intelligent design argue that there are telltale features of living systems and the universe that are best explained by a designing intelligence. So what telltale signs of intelligence are we talking about? There are many, but let's focus here on just one: the digital code stored in the DNA molecule. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick mapped out the structure of the DNA molecule. Along the interior of their famed double helix, they discovered a 4-character code at work. They soon realized that sequences of precisely positioned chemicals, called nucleotide bases, store and transmit the assembly instructions, the information, for building the crucial protein molecules that cells need to survive. No protein molecules, no life. Crick later proposed that the chemical constituents in DNA function like letters in a written language or digital symbols in a computer code. Just as well-functioning computer code depends upon precise sequences of zeros and ones, so too does the function of the DNA molecule depend upon the specific arrangement of chemical bases along the spine of the double helix. Famed biotech specialist Leroy Hood describes the information stored in DNA as digital code. Even Richard Dawkins has acknowledged the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. But where did this information, this digital code, come from? Today, this question lies at the heart of a great scientific mystery, the mystery of the origin of life. Building a living cell requires many proteins, and building proteins requires genetic information in DNA or some other equivalent molecule. Yet to date, no theory of undirected chemical evolution can explain the origin of the digital information needed to build the first living cell from simpler, non-living chemicals.
Okay, you're equivocating abiogenesis with evolution. So, at the most simple explanation, the origin of life is just the transition from geochemistry to biochemistry. I don't know how a digital code fits into that, but what you're asking for is irrelevant.
In other words, the problem of getting life from non-life. Why is this a problem? There is simply too much information in the cell to be explained by chance alone.
Are the chemicals that make up your body, are they alive? Is the carbon alive? Or the hydrogen?
The probability of generating a section of DNA code capable of building just one functional protein by chance is vanishingly small.
Okay, so this whole probability thing, people like Stephen Meyer, they calculate the probability of the formation of a modern protein or even a complete bacterium with all of its modern protein by random events. This isn't the abiogenesis theory at all. So it's like I said earlier, when you talk about life, are you talking about complex multicellular humans, or are you talking about the most basic single-celled life? They assume that there is a fixed number of proteins with fixed sequences for each protein that are required for life, and they calculate the probability of sequential trials rather than simultaneous ones, and they misunderstand what is meant by a probability calculation.
Even taking into account the multi-billion-year history of the universe, and even the simplest living cells require hundreds of proteins. Thus, the given enough time, anything is possible argument no longer works. Origin of life researchers agree. The chance hypothesis has failed. Chemistry doesn't help us either. Unlike basic chemical compounds, like a crystal of salt, the chemical letters in the DNA message do not arrange themselves as a result of mutual attraction. Saying otherwise would be like saying that the message in a newspaper headline could spontaneously emerge because of the way ink sticks to paper.
I mean, nucleotide chemistry is still just chemistry. Even if it's different from salt, it's still chemistry.
Clearly, something else is at work. In this case, a newspaper editor. Yet proponents of intelligent design do not argue for the theory because all these other theories, chance, chemical laws, or some combination,
What the heck is chance theory? I've never heard of that.
have failed. Instead, they argue for intelligent design because our uniform and repeated experience, the basis of all scientific reasoning, shows that systems with digital information invariably arise from intelligence. DNA functions like a software program. We know from experience that software comes from programmers. We know that information, whether inscribed in hieroglyphics, written in a book, or encoded in a radio signal, always arises from an intelligent source.
Oh, this old chestnut. So if you call the nucleotide sequence information, and then you say, oh well, a radio broadcast, there's a DJ on the other end, and he's intelligent. That means that the nucleotide sequence must have come from my God of the Christian Bible. You're making like several leaps of logic there.
So the discovery of information at the foundation of life in even the simplest living cells provides strong grounds for inferring that a designing intelligence played a role in the origin of life. So contrary to what you may have heard, intelligent design is not based on religion, but on scientific discoveries. It is also based on the same method of scientific reasoning that Charles Darwin used, a method that relies on our uniform experience of cause and effect to guide our theories about what happened in the past.
That is just nonsense. Okay, the courts ruled ID is religion and not science. And to say that intelligent design functions on the same principles as Darwin's theories of natural selection, it's just crap. It's just not true.
You may still wish to dismiss the theory of intelligent design.
Not a theory.
You're free to believe whatever you like, but you'll have a hard time doing so based on the science. I'm Stephen Meyer of the Discovery Institute and author of Signature in the Cell for Prager University.
Okay, I think this is the last one, guys.
In a recent interview, while I was presenting some scientific discoveries that may point to the existence of God,
Please share them.
a camera operator, a young woman whom I'll call Maria, began to weep visibly. Later, she told me the reason for her tears. Like many young people, Maria believed in
She was chopping onions.
God when she arrived in college. But while there, she repeatedly encountered professors who insisted that based on the science, God was a myth, no more real than Santa Claus. Maria didn't feel equipped to challenge her professors. She eventually left college with nagging doubts about her faith and wondered whether life, including her own life, might be nothing more than a cosmic accident. Many young people share Maria's doubts. Indeed, powerful voices in the academy tell us that science makes belief in God and human significance untenable.
While there are scientists who are religious, like Mary Schweitzer, they just know that they separate their faith from the work they do in the lab.
Or as Richard Dawkins, the famed atheist from Oxford, has asserted, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference.
Okay, so I'm going to read the full quote with its context. It says, the total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive, others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear, others are being slowly devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. So his quote was about DNA.
But are we the product of such indifference? That is, purely materialistic processes that did not have us in mind, as another scientific atheist has put it? Does the universe have the properties we should expect if this all there is matter vision of reality is correct? Perhaps not. 3 major scientific discoveries contradict the expectations of scientific atheists and point instead in a distinctly God-friendly direction. First, the Big Bang. Discoveries in observational astronomy and developments in theoretical physics have revealed that the universe had a beginning. This is contrary to the expectation of scientific materialists who long portrayed the universe as eternal and self-existent, and therefore in no need of an external creator. This evidence for a beginning has instead confirmed the expectation of theists. Nobel laureate Arno Penzias helped make a key discovery establishing a cosmic beginning. He later observed, the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the first 5 books of Moses and the Bible as a whole.
Okay, so I'm going to read the full quote of this guy. It's a little bit long, so bear with me. It says, the thing I'm most interested in now is whether the universe is open or closed. If it is open, that is expanding forever from a single great explosion of Genesis, and the data seems to indicate that it is open, this is precisely the universe that organized religion predicts, to put it in crude terms. A closed universe, one that explodes, expands, falls back on itself, and explodes again, repeating the process over and over eternally, that would be a pointless universe. A theologian friend of mine who is a priest once told me that he could not conceive of Calvary happening twice. He said his faith as a Christian would be shaken if it could be proven to him that the universe, with its finite number of particles, could be reconstituted an infinite number of times. It would mean that every event, the creation of man, this conversation we are having, everything, would be repeated again and again an infinite number of times simply by random chance. That is the meaning of infinity. In other words, a closed universe would be pointless as the throw of dice. But it seems to me that the data we have in hand right now clearly show that there is not nearly enough matter in the universe, not enough by a factor of 3, for the universe to be able to fall back on itself ever again. My argument is that the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, the Bible as a whole. So, there's the full context.
And he's not alone. Cosmological evidence has led...
Okay, and we have a $5 super chat from Dave Dalafior. It says, insert douche chills here.
Other prominent scientists, including former MIT physicist Gerald Schroeder and the great Caltech astronomer Alan Sandage, to affirm a transcendent creator beyond space and time as the best explanation for the origin of our finite universe. Second, fine-tuning. We live in what Australian physicist Luke Barnes calls an extremely fortunate universe, where fundamental laws and physical parameters have somehow been fine-tuned with just the right strengths and values to make life possible. The incredible odds against this happening by chance has led even agnostic and atheistic physicists to marvel. As British physicist Paul Davies has exclaimed, the impression of design is overwhelming. Atheist physicist George Greenstein expresses similar cognitive dissonance. The thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency must be involved. Third, the complexity of life. Molecular biology has revealed the presence in living cells of an exquisite world of informational nanotechnology, digital code in DNA and RNA, tiny, intricately constructed molecular machines, a complex information storage, transmission, and processing system that resembles but vastly exceeds our most advanced digital high technology. Not what anyone would expect to see as the result of blind, materialistic processes. Dawkins himself may have conceded as much when he recently confessed to being knocked sideways with wonder at the miniaturized intricacy of the data processing machinery in the living cell.
I'm really just hearing the same arguments all over again.
So what should we make of all this? For their part, scientific atheists have constructed ever more convoluted and fanciful theories. They posit alien designers to account for the code of life, multiple parallel universes to try to explain fine-tuning, and they've developed elaborate mathematical equations in an attempt to use physics to show how the universe could have begun from nothing physical.
All of that is wrong. The first two are just blatantly wrong, and the third one, that's not the reason why they do the work that they do. They do it because they're doing science. They don't do it to try and prove you guys wrong. That's just you're projecting what you're doing onto them. You're trying to prove the science wrong, to say, look, my Bible is true, but it's not the other way around.
But what if the scientific atheists are just wrong? What if the universe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is an intelligent and purposeful creator behind it all?
Then you win the lottery and you get to go to Disneyland. I don't know. What if you're wrong?
In my book, Return of the God Hypothesis, I argue that the universe has precisely such properties.
And your argument's wrong. Just because you wrote a book doesn't mean that it's what you say in the book is right.
And that raises a hopeful possibility that we are not the product of blind, pitiless indifference.
Well, isn't that just a point of religion in a nutshell? You don't want to feel like nothing happens after you die, and you don't want to die, so instead you're going to make up some warm and fuzzy alternative explanation and just convince yourself that it's true. And then undercut that by surrounding it in a bunch of scientific jargon to make it sound more palatable to idiots. So they'll buy your book.
but instead that we were made on purpose, that we were intended. British historian Paul Johnson has argued that the existence or non-existence of God is the most important question we humans can ever ask. Given the scientific evidence we now have, it might be time to consider or reconsider this question. I'm Stephen Meyer.
Okay, well, that's the end of the video. That was pretty painful, but I hope you guys enjoyed me doing a video. This is the first time I've done a video about Prager U, so let me know if you might want to see me do another reaction vid to their vids, because they have a ton of just god-awful videos about atheism and about a bunch of other stuff, just all right-wing talking points like global warming or climate change isn't real, and you should teach your kids to be religious even if you know that it's not true. You should just do it anyway. Women should be in the kitchen. Gay people are bad. Just the classic, right-wing talking points. But let me know what you guys thought of the video. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We recently passed 4,000 subscribers, so that's awesome. And if you'd like to support my channel past just liking the video or subscribing or leaving a comment, you can go to patreon.com/atheistjr and you can sign up to make a monthly donation. You unlock all of the benefits if you make a donation of $1 per month. So you get early access to videos, exclusive videos that you'll only see on my Patreon, live streams that you'll only see on there, channel updates. You get to vote in polls like this. Like I did a poll if people wanted to see this video or a debate review, so they voted for this one. So you get to directly influence the content that I make, and you get channel updates. So yeah, do all that and leave a comment below letting me know what you thought of the stream, and I'll just see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.